Welcome everyone. This is the 81st edition of Paola's Studiolo, and my name is Paola Vojnovic. I'm an art historian based in Florence, and I'm truly honored to have a special guest in the Studiolo, Daniel Graves. Daniel, thank you for welcoming me and all of us to your Studiolo, to your studio.
Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity to spread the word.
Yes.
Mhm.
I think many people on the call with us today actually know you or your work.
Mhm.
But what I wanted to do, maybe start with just a simple question. When did you come to Florence first? And on that first visit, did you know this would become your home?
Actually, I had no idea. I was just backpacking through around the world. And so, yeah, it was quite a surprise to come to Florence and realize that so much of the artwork that I loved was right here in Florence. And as soon as I could, I figured out a way to come back. And I did in 1971. I came back as a graduate student at Villa Schifanoia. I brought my family with me, and we stayed for almost 3 years, and then went back to the States, back to Minnesota, where I was working with a professor, and paid off my loans, and came back to Florence in 1976, and I've been here ever since.
Wow.
So Florence is my home for sure, but I couldn't think of a better place to live. It has all of the stimulus and beauty that a painter could ever ask for.
Yes, yes. I think everyone on the call probably agrees with that. I think Florence is a place like no other. And I think the artistic souls find their home here, right? You can feel at home the moment you step out in the streets.
Yeah. Well, it has for hundreds of years, and it seems to be growing again. Right now, we have a few Atelier schools similar to the Florence Academy of Art, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. They've sprung up. I mean, I started teaching in 1983 with a colleague, and we had a very small atelier, and it grew to about 35 people. Then we split up, and then I started the Florence Academy of Art in 1991. And it's just been crescendoing ever since. I had maybe a handful of students in the beginning, and now we're about 100 students from 38 different countries all around the world. And we have a waiting list. So it's obviously, this kind of training is something, it's in demand, it's of interest to young people. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk today about, the training of young artists, and how similar it is to the training of painters since the Renaissance, and probably all the way back to Greece. The skill sets are very similar. They're very much the same. And I think how I explain it to the layperson would be to correlate it between the way that you would study classical music. Like if you were going to learn the violin, you practice your fingering and you practice scales, and it would take hours and hours to perfect the ability to play the instrument. And that's exactly the kind of training that we have at the Florence Academy. You start off, and it's the same training that it's been, because it's skill-based art. And so you have the craft as the base, and you build on the skills by practicing them. So in the Renaissance, a young painter would go into the studio of a master painter, and they would sweep the floors and grind the pigments and prepare the canvases and do all the work that needed to be done in preparation. But all of that was really important, that they would understand how things were made, how they were put together. And this understanding of the materials is one of the things that's really been lacking for the past 100 years. The young people that come to the school, they have no clue about what is oil paint, how do you prepare a canvas to paint on. And so this is part of the training, is to learn all the materials, how they're used, and how to control them. Because just like any craft, or if you're a furniture maker or a violin maker, you would need to know all of these materials and how they interact and how you can manipulate them to get them to do what you want to do. And I think one of the mysteries of, when you look at 17th century painting of Rembrandt or Velasquez or whoever, you realize how how much the materials played into what they were able to actually paint. And so as the young student, young painter learns this craft and practices the scales, so to speak, they're also learning the materials that they eventually will manipulate and how to control that. So it's challenging on many levels, and I think many people that come to the school and visit and they walk in, the first impression is quite striking, because you may have 50 or 60 people in a couple of rooms close by, and there's not a single sound. Everybody is like working really hard and concentrating, and it's
Yes.
so to continue with this, just to explain the education of the young painter, I brought in a number of books that I've acquired through the years that can help you to understand a little bit better the technical part. And there are many. It's surprising how many manuals were produced and how much information was available to the painters. And so the first one I have for you is a manual, and it's completely made from engravings. So that it's not a photographic reproduction or anything. These are all handmade engravings. And it was a manual produced in Germany in 1776. And every single plate was made from copper plates and then drawn to explain one phase of the process. And so this one, and this is the continuing phenomenon that happened from early Greece to today, is everything starts with a plumb line. So it's how you measure the world around you. You hold a plumb line in front of you, the subject you're going to paint or draw, and with that, it's a reference point that you can then measure from to get exact and precise measurements. Because the first skill that you have to acquire is accuracy. It's an absolutely necessary skill for control. It's not something that you necessarily will use for the rest of your life as a painter and an artist, but it's the starting point. And so here you see a series of exercises, and everything's based with first putting down the plumb line. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but it just might give you an idea. There's some eye drawings, but every one of them has the plumb line running through it as the starting point. So you have a point where you can measure from. So that gives you an idea. In this manual, there are hundreds and hundreds of drawings, and they're all based on mannerism and a kind of Michelangelo-esque style, which was very fashionable at the time. We don't use this kind of manual any longer, but at the time it was really, really valuable. I'm going to see if I can find something that's a little bit more specific. There's even a whole chapter on anatomy, which they go into learning all the bones and muscles of the human body, and they have to memorize all of those. And that's something we still do today. We have an anatomy program and an crochet program at the Florence Academy where students study all the muscles and bones of the body.
And do you have a real model that actually comes in?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it is truly a Florentine Academy, something that even someone like Giorgio Vasari would have attended in his time here.
Well, it really, yeah, it stems from what he started. He started the first academy, and from that, the Carangi's had their academy in Bologna, and it's a tradition that's continued on to
our day today. Daniel, how hard was it for you to actually set up a school in Italy? As someone who is an outsider, someone who is coming in, Florentine, you're Florentine heart. How long did that take? And how long did it actually until you realized, wow, I need to have this training available to students who come here?
Well, if you roll back to the 70s and 80s, there were no academies that were functioning on a large scale that offered everything that the École des Beaux-Arts did in the 1880s in Paris, or in Italy, the academies there earlier. So it was literally putting the pieces back together. We talked about the shards of the tradition and figuring out, reading, learning about how painters were trained, and adapting what we knew from that. And a little bit of my history is that I studied with Signorina Simi, whose father was Filippo Simi, who was part of the Macchiaioli movement in Florence. And she was in her late 80s and eventually in her 90s when I was studying with her. And that was an amazing connection with the tradition and how things were done and how people were taught in the 1880s. And I also studied with Richard Lack in Minnesota, who had studied with Ives Gammel, and Ives Gammel studied with Paxton with Tarble, going all the way back to the École des Beaux-Arts again. So that was really the fountainhead in Europe in the 1880s, most of the 1800s. So it's not a kind of pedigree, but it is a way of putting the pieces back together because they had fallen apart. And so you get, and then Pietro Ramagoni, who I come to study with here in Florence, he didn't take students any longer, but I did meet him and worked with him and knew him quite well. He wrote forwards to some of my shows, and he was a great mentor, great friend. But he was constantly experimenting with materials and encouraged everybody to try fresco painting, try watercolor, try tempera grassa, oil paint, everything, to see how you adapted to it and what you could express through this new medium. So the medium is in a great deal is the message. So you find a voice with the medium that you choose to work with.
Daniel, do you think being in Florence and being surrounded with beautiful art everywhere you go, and you can walk into Uffizi on every given day, do you think it changed you as an artist? If you have stayed in Minnesota or in the US, upper state in New York when you were born, do you think you would have been a different artist? Or would you have the skill that you have today?
No, I mean, it is so much a part of who I am as an artist and who I am as a person. I mean, the culture, the people, the landscape, it informs you every minute of every day. You walk through the streets and you see a fresco in a little archway, or how a door handle is made, or a walk on the countryside and you see the architecture of the country homes. It's spectacularly beautiful here, and everybody who visits here has the same impression, whether it's Florence or Venice. It's there's so much beauty, and I think it recharges your batteries and fills you with things that you want to hold on to or express. Yeah, can't imagine being anywhere else.
Yeah, so you found your home, you found your calling and mission, and you have touched the lives of so many, the students who come through the academy. So in the Renaissance, if you're an artist, you would start your apprenticeship very early, at the age of maybe 11 or 12, right? You would already start
12, 13, 14, and then sure. Yeah.
Thinking about your family would be the one who would maybe encourage you to go and do this, but the family would have to pay, correct, to a teacher who would take the student on.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it was a very different process, and the training would really last for 5-6 years, right? Until they actually started using the brush and painting. They would have to spend 5 years in the artist studio, correct?
Signorina Simi, we would often talk to her at lunchtime, and she would tell stories about her father and his training in the École des Beaux-Arts. He met many American painters and traveled with them and painted. So there was a strong connection between the US and the studio. And she would say that one point of pride that she had was that in the late 1800s, a doctor had to study for 6 years to become a doctor. But to become a painter, you had to study for 7 years.
Okay.
I think technology has changed that for sure, but yeah, it still takes a long time to acquire all the skills necessary to become a proficient and good painter.
And I think it's a lifelong, right? It's a lifelong process. You never stop.
Learning every day. That's the wonderful thing about being a painter, is that you're constantly being challenged by your ideas and what you're able to produce. Yeah, I couldn't imagine a better, richer life, and it's impossible.
I feel the same, you know, as an art historian living in Florence.
Oh,
I
gosh,
feel
yeah, really.
it's a never-ending process. I think you mentioned Antigone. Didn't he do a portrait of the Queen of England?
Oh, yes.
He did two, right?
They now have an exhibition in Livorno of his work.
Okay.
That's up right now at the Fattori Museum, and it is spectacular. They have over 200 works there, and
Wow.
some of his best paintings. So I'm going back again to see it again. It's wonderful.
He was one of the Florentine painters. I think what makes Antigone really special is the fact that there is one of the altarpieces in San Lorenzo Church was
Yes.
painted by him.
Mhm.
So you kind of think when you come to Florentine churches, you will only find early Renaissance artists, but actually tradition went on, and someone even in the 20th century was able to do all the altarpieces for a Florentine church. So I think which
He
is
also
really, really
frescoed
sweet.
the cathedral in Monte Cassino.
Okay.
Yeah, he did one of the large, when they reconstructed Monte Cassino after World War II,
Yeah.
they needed to refresco the walls, and so he was commissioned to do that.
I think I see how many books. This is the perfect teacher who always has the books ready. And I think this is only, let's see what else you have prepared for us.
Well, these are all in French, but I found these in a little bookstore in Belgium, and they are the manual for the École des Beaux-Arts, which I had never seen anywhere else. There are 2 on art history, 1 on composition, 1 on anatomy, and they're full of illustrations and explanations for the students. So I think one day it would be wonderful to have these reprinted and used, as many of the other manuals are starting to be reproduced now, so that students have access to them, because they're really informative. They're extremely helpful. The one I just showed you from Germany in 1776 is is a little outdated for us today because it's not connected that much to nature. But some of the more recent ones are we use in the academy. So those I'm going to show you next. There's another little book that I think is really good, and it's available on in Dover Publications. It's called The Practice and Science of Drawing by Harold Speed. All of our students read it. It's an incredible explanation of how the training functions and what it is that you need to acquire, what skills you need. And it's written really well. I mean, he's just a great writer. So it's fun to read. Then, of course, Vasari's Lives of what he says here, painters, sculptors, and architects. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
Let me see your edition.
Really,
And I have to say, I'm
so
relieved.
good.
I actually have one book I already know and I've seen. Everything else is very new to me here. So I'm glad I'm going to hold on to Vasari for a moment.
And then there's Cennini, the very earliest manual. I couldn't get my hands on a copy of that. I have it somewhere, but I couldn't find it. That's one of the earliest records of the formulas that painters used in the Renaissance, like how to make gesso. In the proportions of the gesso and rabbit skin glue are still used today. They're timeless, and it's still one of the most one of the long-lasting preparations you can have for painting on panel canvas.
You know, Giulio Cennini, I have to go back to that for a second, because we have someone who is in 1300s, right? He's active in 1300s,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he has this interesting manual. So even back then, thinking about transferring the knowledge, talking about what the artist needs, isn't that so incredible?
What's unusual is that most artist studios were under top secret. They were not allowed to talk about or discuss what was done and used in the studios. So it was a bit like the technology world of today, where Apple is not giving out all their secrets, and that's the way it was then. And right up until the 19th century, artist studios, when you entered, you were sworn to secrecy.
Wow. Is it the same in your school when the students meet? Do they have to sign a paper that they will not reveal any secrets of how to mix the pigments?
There I am giving you all this information is like saying, yeah, no, I think the proliferation of this information is so important. If this movement is going to continue, we need, in fact, the way I teach is that I'm hoping that every painter becomes a teacher, that they are given the information so that they can then open their own atelier and teach students of their own. And I think it's kind of, for me, I felt it was my duty to do that, because as I put pieces of this tradition back together, and I realized that other people had come to Florence and they were trying to do the same thing that I was doing. So I was just a few years ahead of them, and so I could help them out. And so that, I think, is the way that this will continue to grow, and it is growing for sure. There are ateliers popping up all over the world, and there are hundreds of thousands of young people who are studying this. And you can see from the shift in art school in America, the traditional ones that we've been aware of in the US, universities and so forth, are struggling right now, because artists are now shifting and turning toward atelier training, because the skill-based training, there's a kind of a subjective way of looking at things that, and you can tell you can accomplish something. So if you set out with a goal and you work really hard, at the end of that goal, you've achieved something. And I think it's really gratifying. And that's one of the things missing, certainly in my education that I had early on at the university level in the US, was very hard to figure out. It was mostly conceptual and very little, almost no information about what I was expected to actually do. And so this is a complete flip from that, where and I think the other thing to keep in mind is that many of the abstract painters that flourished during the early 20th century had been trained at the École des Beaux-Arts. And Matisse and others were, Picasso, they all had training, and they all actually worked. The other book that I want to show you is this, which I helped to have published, which is the Charles Parr lithographs. Jerry Ackerman, the art historian who eventually published this, I gave him the idea to do that, and he gives me credit for that in the introduction.
Wow.
But we were supposed to co-author it, but didn't happen. But anyway, these lithographs are now being reproduced in large scale, and our students at the Florence Academy are using them to learn. This is their first exercises that they will have when they come to the academy. So I can show you one or two to give you an idea of what they look like. Okay. Here's some here. So you may have seen them already. In fact, this one, I believe Picasso actually copied. I saw a book on Picasso, and they showed this as a cast drawing, but it actually was of Charles Parr, the graph that he copied.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable. And this looks so much like Michelangelo's, the torso that Michelangelo would go crazy over, right?
In fact, many of the drawings are of classical Greek sculpture. And I'd like to take a minute and talk about that because I think it's extremely important that the examples that are used to learn from or to draw from are also informing one's taste about what they think is beautiful, or how they express or translate the world around them into something more structurally beautiful. So when you look at for example, the Velázquez portrait, and you see brushstrokes describing planes of the head, and you know that those don't exist in nature, that it's more organic, and those shapes are far more subtle. But through the training, Velázquez is learned to interpret them and simplify them so that they become stronger shapes, and they interlock to form a really strong impression of form and light. And this is what the training is all about, because it's it's informing the way in which you translate nature. Because if you just copy the surface of everything, it becomes kind of photographic, almost pixelated, and little digitalized images. And I believe all great art has been filtered through some aesthetic or some process that informs it and creates something that's quite beautiful from nature, which is the fountainhead, but it's that it's the artist's view of that that becomes so important. And that's why you can look at a small section of a painting by various artists from Leonardo, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, you name it. And even a small section, you can tell who painted it.
Yes.
And if you look at an arrangement of works by people who like, photographically copy objects that they see, you can't tell who painted it because there's no interpretation, there's no translation. And it sounds probably to the layman like, who cares? If the painting is beautiful, I don't care how it's done. And sure, there is a bit of that, but these kind of things are what we live and die for. I mean, for me to sit and copy like a photocopy machine would be so boring, such a waste of time. And I know that what generates the sense and awe of beauty is the mystery of how someone like Rembrandt or Leonardo, how they actually painted, because it defies logic. Sometimes you look at the painting and say, how on earth was that thing done? And I think that's excitement about painting. It's like, these images don't just magically appear on the canvas. That they are worked over and over and over and thought of and adjusted and changed a million times. And in that process, it's the refinement of what's inside the artist, and that they're trying to get this out. And because I'm daily doing this, I feel very much akin to the artists that I most admire.
And you know what? I love the things you were saying, for example, looking at nature and copying that on the canvas. It is something that Domenico Ghirlandaio would tell his students. He would say the best teacher is nature.
Yeah.
Look around you. But I guess it goes much further than just looking at it. It's actually going almost like through things to be able to reproduce them.
I think you're inspired by nature, and you extract, but if you copy all the information that you have, then it just becomes just a digital reproduction of it. It's what's left out so often and how it's simplified. And I like to think about that process is almost like constructing, it's almost like architecture. It's not, you're literally building something rather than just reproducing what you see.
Yes.
Of course it's visual. Of course you're informed by what you see, but it's so much more than that. If, for example, in music, I think many people understand this through music much better than through the visual world. So if you play a piece of music, let's say it's on the piano, and you hit all the notes at the right time, and so it's kind of like perfect, or you have a player piano and it just plays the notes. How do you compare that to some great pianist that plays it with all the heart and soul?
Yes.
The great, wonderful quote of when one works with their hands, their crafts are labor, and then they work with their hands and their head, they're craftsmen. When they work with their hands, their head, and their heart, they're an artist. And it's the heart. Like so often at least I'm brought to tears when I see a work of art that is so felt that you enter into their world and you go, oh my God, that is just amazing. And sometimes you can't describe why or what it is. It could be a Chardin painting with nothing but a peach on the table, and you go,
yes,
unbelievably beautiful.
Yes, yes.
It's that world of perfect harmony and beauty. And I think one of the things that I have problems with modern art is that so often the element of beauty is left out, and everything's easy when you don't add beauty to it. I think it's just, wow. And so the other example I love to use when talking to people that are unfamiliar with, the creative process or painting in general is like, imagine yourself in front of a blank canvas, and your job is to paint something on that canvas that is meaningful and beautiful, and that hasn't been done exactly like that before. So you can't copy something else. I mean, everything's a mixture of other styles and other things you've seen for sure. But the difficulty is that it has to be unique. And so how do you get there? How do you get to that place where you can say, okay, if I put this on the canvas, I can put some of myself into that and make it a unique work of art. But, in so doing, you realize how inadequate you are.
Yeah.
That's the scariest thing. So you have to get over the fear and just do it anyway.
I know that the big process of training as an artist was to copy works of art of the great masters.
Sure.
I know it was something that they practiced in the Uffizi Gallery all the way until 1800s, right? They had people who would request that the student, you would come in and you would be allowed to sit in the gallery. And I think many American museums do that. I think in France, it's still possible. Uffizi, you can do that. Unfortunately, that practice is kind of lost. But how important it is to copy old masters.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a wonderful question. Super. It's really important. It's literally like a musician learning to play Mozart and Beethoven, Paganini, and all these other things. It is a huge part of, once you have all the skills, the record skills to be able to do that, then it's that middle step before. I mean, Sargent copied Velázquez and Halls and all these painters in the Prado, I think. Another thing you might not know is that in the 1880s, the Louvre was closed 2 days a week to the public, so that artists could come and copy.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. What a wonderful fact.
Yeah, no, that was that important. And you had to book, the painting you wanted to copy months and sometimes years ahead of time, so that you could actually get into
spend time with it. Yeah. And I think there is something incredible to be said to be spending time with a masterpiece, right?
Oh yeah. In
a company of a masterpiece. I remember the first time ever I saw a painting by Rembrandt was actually in an exhibition in Rome. It was in the Vatican. It's called Pietro is Here. So it was all about St. Peter. There was a huge painting by Caravaggio in the room, and I turned and I just saw smallest painting in the exhibition. It was St. Peter, a tiny painting by Rembrandt. And I did it before I even saw the name. I was in tears because I knew it was Rembrandt's work. Like his soul was just shining through this dark patina. So I think spending time with the works of art, I think that's also another thing. And I think we can do that in Florence, right? How about your academy? Do your students, are they encouraged to go to the museums? Are they required to spend time in the galleries?
Absolutely. Yeah. Big part of our program is we have Florence is our backyard, so we take as much advantage of it as we possibly can. The exhibitions that come up, we try to organize tours to go and see them. Yeah, very, very important. And it seems maybe obvious, but I think reminding people how important it is to see work in their original place and in the flesh, so to speak. I have students tell me all the time now, oh, I've seen this painting, I've seen that painting. And I said, wow, you've been to St. Petersburg. That would be difficult right now. And they go, no, I never haven't been to St. Petersburg. I said, well, then you haven't seen the painting, have you? It's a huge difference. A painting is an object. It's not just an image. And so when you appreciate it, when you look at the painting and you move around it and the light changes and you see the brush strokes, and it's a complete experience. I remember first coming to Florence, and one of the things I was so surprised about was how big the frescoes were. It was like, I saw them in reproductions in my book. They were like this big. And I was like, how could they be that big? And yeah, it changes everything. The scale is so important.
true. Or how small Mona Lisa is when you see it, right?
Yeah, and that's why
You could have
people
expected
could've
bigger.
needed- Well, you know, encourage them to come to Florence and you take them to see the actual thing. That's amazing. That's so important. Yeah.
I was just in Santa Croce today, and I went to see the Peruzzi Chapel, and of course, there is one of the earliest drawings by Michelangelo. I think he was like probably 14 years old. He actually copies the two of the figures from Giotto's.
Yeah. Mhm.
The detail from the Peruzzi Chapel. So I kind of imagine young Michelangelo walking in Santa Croce, saying hello to the friars, and then just sitting there to really understand what Giotto is doing and how he's telling us the story.
If we have enough time, I'd like to show you a painting that I made a few years ago. It took me
Yeah.
about 4 years to paint it, connecting my experiences, my life in Florence as an educator and as an artist. So what's kind of got me interested in putting this painting together was what we were talking about earlier, is Vasari's. He designed Michelangelo's tomb in Santa Croce.
Yes.
And on that tomb, there's the symbol of 3 wreaths interlocking, which is also the symbol for the academy here in Florence, the Arte.
Okay.
So, and each ring symbolizes an aspect of art. Like one is the architect, one is for sculpture, and one is the painter. And I wanted to use that as the central theme in the painting. I have, it's called Prodigy, and there's a young girl who comes in showing her drawing. And one of the stories that I found so interesting from reading art history when I first came was that Cimabue was leaving Florence, and he was walking through the countryside, and he came across a shepherd, and he was drawing on a stone with a piece of charcoal ram's heads and sheep. And Cimabue stopped and he looked at it and he said, "Wow, this is really good." And it turned out that this person was Giotto. Yeah. So he took him back to Florence and educated him as a painter. So
this is what is the first thing in the book, right? You're gonna start this. That's why you want me to keep the book. Or sorry, I could have took it on, but
no, it's fine. So that, along with the 3 wreaths, was the central theme of the painting. I represented the sculptor who is carving a sculpted like a nude figure, and it's meant to be Bartolini, who's a Florentine sculptor, and I chose that particular sculptor because he was head of the academy in Florence for a while, and he changed from the neoclassical style to a more realistic style, and he had models come into the studio, which was unheard of. And it was Lorenzo who literally upset the apple cart in all of Europe. They were first laughing at him, and then all of a sudden everybody got on board because they saw what beautiful works could be produced from life. And so I thought it was a really great idea and theme for this painting to remind us that nature is the fountainhead for all art. The painter is standing on a stool behind, working on a painting of the Ponte Vecchio, which again is symbol of Florence, which I find, it's right in the heart of Florence. It's symbolically, it bridges both sides of the city, and it also bridges time in the sense that it's a continuum of the tradition. The architect who's leaning on a capital is acanthus, is the name of a plant that it was designed from. And so again, to continue with that story of nature informing art, some of the architecture is actually based on the real plants.
Yeah.
And let's see, sculptor, painter, architect, and I'm represented as a self-portrait, as you might see, as a teacher, and I have a manual in my hand of the tradition of realist art. So, passing along that information, you can come as a as a prodigy, but you have to still be educated. So, and the figure on the right, which I added later, and I found also really important, I was missing something and I realized it was history. So this figure represents history for me. And the shield that she's pointing to was produced by Bartolini, and it was a reminder of, it was his reminder of going back to nature. And you can make even a hunchback beautiful if you go to nature. So that was the theme of the painting. And there's an empty frame leaning up against this pedestal for a symbol of works that will be created in the future.
Okay, still waiting to be created.
Yeah, it wasn't commissioned. I just, it's a personal expression. It's something I wanted to do. And I always felt that it needed to go in a public space someplace. And because it, I think, is a reminder of the tradition in Florence, that it's still alive. It's still here and thriving. And many people don't know about it.
I had a great pleasure to see this painting. The event organized by our mutual friend, Hershey Felder, for the school.
Oh, yeah.
So it is quite large. Tell us the dimensions.
Yeah, it's 3.5 meters by 2.5 meters.
Yes, I was really impressed with the skill, the size of it. And you also have the 3 rings of the Florentine.
Yeah, they're on just below the hand of the
Yeah,
sculptor.
here they are, which is, of course, something that Bazar invented, right?
Yeah.
He's the one who kind of starts with that.
It's great fun. I went to Santa Croce. It was under construction at the time, and made a drawing of the 3 wreaths, and then brought back and then painted it from that.
Yeah,
a lot of research goes into a painting. It's like you look at an image, you go, "Oh yeah, it just all of a sudden happened." But under every single figure that you see there are probably 5 or 6 variations. I've had 3 or 4 different sculptures in there. Yeah, it's just a long process of finding exactly the right position to tell the story.
Yeah, beautiful. I know you had other images that you wanted to share with us. I think other 2. Let's see if we can pull that one up and see the other 2 paintings. I think it was actually quite interesting.
Yeah, these are paintings I'm working on now that I'm almost embarrassed because everybody says, "Oh, what are you doing these for?" And I go, I think somewhere deep inside me, I have all of these kind of archetype people, and they just needed to come out. And so I have painted, as you can see over there, Paula.
Yeah.
I have 5 of those boxes full of these paintings.
Wow.
And there are probably 30 or 40 in here, so I have about 200 of them.
Wow.
And I just keep producing them, and people like them. It's been really amazing. It's been fun.
So tell us about them. Are they like poems that appear to poets and you have to write them down quickly? I mean, how do they appear to you, and what keeps you working on them?
I have no idea. I am just obsessed. It's just in fact, underneath each one of these heads is probably 5 or 6 other heads.
Wow.
When I come into the morning and I look at them and I go, "Oh, I don't like that," and I start changing it and become something different. They keep evolving. I'm fascinated by light and texture, of trying to create a kind of sense of skin, if you will. But they're not a specific person. They kind of live at somewhere between. I mean, they look real enough, I guess, but
they are.
They also should look kind of dreamlike, I think.
Yes, yes. I'm wondering if there are these interesting. I think they're also, yes. I just, each one is so beautiful, and there's so many. If I move from here, you can see just how many of them are around, and just absolutely beautiful, each one of them. Just unbelievable.
I paint landscape. I do still life, landscape, commissioned portraits, pretty much everything. I just have a lot of energy that I need to, when I go to the beach, I last about a few hours, and then I start making stuff.
Painting on the sand.
As some of you can see behind me, I have all these bottles of pigments and oils and so forth. I could talk about the technical side of painting for days and days.
Do you mix your own colors?
Everything. I make all my own
Pigments?
canvas, all my own
Wow.
pigments. The only thing I don't do is make my own brushes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think we have better brushes today than they did in the 1700s. So that's one of the things that may have improved in time. Most everything else has not. Like most of the paints you get from paint suppliers, you know, I'm not going to name any names, but brands you see in art stores, they're full of, yeah, who knows? They're not required to put on the label what it is that's inside of them, so you have no idea, and you paint with them, and then they can literally fall off the canvas.
Or change over time.
All my pigments come from, you know, reputable suppliers, and I wash my linseed oil, cold pressed linseed oil, and take all the impurities out, and you know, cook the oils, yeah, just like they did hundreds of years ago, and pass that along to all my students.
So I wanted to ask you quickly about this school, maybe last question, then we can go into questions of our audience. The training in the school is 3 years?
3 years, full-time program, and then a possible 4th year.
And if someone wanted to just come and study in Florence for a few weeks or a month, can they do that?
Yeah, we have workshops, intense workshops. In fact, I'm starting an etching workshop. I think the first of its kind, probably for at least 100 years, because it's traditional line etching on copper plates.
Okay,
So
wow.
it's a dream of mine. I've been etching since I was in my 20s. I supported myself by selling etchings on the streets of Florence when I first came. So
I'm glad I have
history.
one of them. I have your Venice, beautiful Venice
Oh, okay. So
canal.
yeah, I've had to learn a lot by, well, I would just go to museums and talk to the curators. I bought every book on etching technique. I have hundreds of them from the 19th century and earlier. And it's like, it's been such an exciting process of learning all this material from the past that it wasn't available. I had nobody to learn it from, really. Bits and pieces from various artists and so forth, but it just keeps, you know, filling in all the empty spots. You know, eventually we'll get back to a point where I think it would make sense to say, like, if classical music just stopped being played for 100 years and nobody was teaching it, and then all of a sudden somebody dug up some sheets of music and said, well, you know, here's the violin, here's the music, play something, and then you go, well, how do I, where are the fingerings, and how do I, you know, use the bow? And then, you know, somebody come along and, you know, say, well, this, I remember this part of it, and then somebody else will say, I remember this part of it, and then
So
eventually,
piecing it together.
yeah, it's been
Wow.
really exciting. I mean, I'm never bored, but it's very challenging, and the bar has been set so high by such great artists that as you start to assemble all these things, and you think when you're young, oh my gosh, you know, a few more years and I'll be painting like, you know, the greatest artist that ever lived. And then as you get more information and you get better at painting, you realize that instead of getting closer, they just keep getting bigger, higher, you know, more amazing every time you, and so when you read the 19th century painters talking about the 17th century painters, they're always in awe. And we can't even paint the 19th century, you know, level. So can you imagine? So.
No, I can imagine. I had a chance to talk to someone who is an expert on the Dento Art, 13th century gold leaf paintings that are basically made of wood. And he told me that already in the Trecento, so 100 years later, they lost a bit of that craft.
Sure.
So the paintings that are from the 13th century are better than painting from 14th century from this technical point of view. You apply, how they apply gold leaf.
Availability of materials. They're disappearing. For example, white lead. People say, oh, you don't want to use white lead. You have a substitute for that. No, there is no substitute for white lead. You have, as a traditional painter, it allows you to create effects that nothing else will allow you to do that. So,
yes.
And then we get bans and, you know, restrictions and all these things, and yet On the other hand, people can go out and shoot guns, and the lead is sprayed all over our forests, but, a painter can't put it on canvas because somehow that's illegal.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
very difficult. It's getting more and more difficult. As
Yes.
we get closer, other things get further away.
Yeah. Yeah. Unbelievable. Well, you have created an amazing school, and I have had the pleasure to meet many of your students who now have careers of their own and who go back to their homes and home countries and keep going and keep spreading this incredible training they got. So I think you accomplished something really, truly wonderful. I even bet Giorgio Vasari would have put you in his own book. If he was around, even though he was really partial to all the Tuscan-born artists, you might have been the only one he included, in the.
Who knows?
We will never know. But I wanted to see what were the questions coming in.
Sure.
I might grab my computer so I can see them a little bit easier. So yes, I think there's many interesting questions coming in, actually from many artists who have signed up just to hear this talk today.
Great.
But maybe tell us a little bit about the workshops and when is the next one coming up?
Oh, well, the first workshop in Etching will be in May, but that will be just in-house. So our students are able to sign up for that. And I'm doing that partly because it's a first run and I want to get all the bugs out before we go completely public. And the next workshop will be in September, and then that will be open to the public. But we have a workshop program that goes all year round. An introduction to the whole gamut of what we do at the Florence Academy, starting with paint, starting with drawing and going into painting. We also have workshops in sculpture, anatomy, pretty much you name it. Whatever we do with the Florence Academy, we have a workshop for it.
All right, so I have some really exciting questions, and some of them dovetail really nicely to previous Studiolo guests.
Okay.
So one of my guests was Betty Edwards. And have you ever read Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and do you recommend it to your students?
I have looked at it. I have not read it.
Okay.
I've spoken with people that have read it, used it, and really swear by it. Were transformed and were so happy about the quality of the work that they were able to produce. It's not that I'm close to it. I just I don't think I haven't had the opportunity, I guess.
Yes.
I saw it in a bookstore once quite a while ago when I was in the US. So.
I think
it's huge
It's
success.
a huge success, and to have Betty come to the Studiolo and talk about the second book, which was written at her 95th year of life, on the drawing with the dominant eye.
Oh wow!
So that's also interesting too.
How cool! Yeah, it's like combining science with the actual act of drawing or painting. Fascinating, really fascinating. And Leonardo was incredibly fascinated with that. And the whole site size. I didn't talk about site size. That's what we use at the school for learning to see proportions and see the whole subject. But he created a screen with a grid on it with wires in it, and then reproduced that screen on a paper so that he would look through a small washer so his eye wouldn't move, and he would look through the screen at the subject he wanted to draw, and then he could literally draw the lines between the squares on the paper and become very, very accurate. So site size is kind of doing that without the screen. You're literally making little squares in space with a plumb line. And it goes very quickly. The thing that's so efficient about it is that you draw everything that you're looking at to scale. So whatever size it is in nature, wherever you're standing, wherever that is, that's exactly the scale that you draw it in on your paper or canvas. So it's been around since probably the Renaissance, and there are schools of thought. Some people hate it, some people love it, but I just find it really efficient and it works. So that's just
amazing. Question is also, how about Robert Henry's text? Do you bring in 19th century theories?
Robert Henry.
You can draw. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have his book at the library and he's on our reading list for sure.
Okay. A lot of questions here. So exciting that artists do not need to sign a non-disclosure agreement to access this further rare knowledge.
Please spread the word. Oh my gosh.
For an older person starting to paint and draw, who does not have the luxury of years of study, do you have courses or suggestions to accelerate learning?
Oh, wow. Painting is so meditative. It opens up parts of your brain and your heart. I think that just don't ever come up with a reason why not to do it. That's what I would say. That there's always an excuse that, oh, I'm not good enough, or I don't have the right training, or whatever. Just spend hours painting every day if you can, and set aside some time. I say that to all the workshop students that can't, they have jobs or they have families or whatever, they can't study full time. So just find 1 hour, 2 hours every day, have a project going that you know that you're building your skills with, and then also have something that it's just really creative. So there are two parts of being an artist. One is skill related, because you're always working on your skills. And the other is like, why are you bothering with all the skill practice if you don't have something to say? So you have to work on both, keep a sketchbook, keep track of your ideas, all that.
Yes. Constant, I guess that is what pays off, right?
Yeah.
Being,
it's enjoyable. It's that,
yes.
When it becomes, oh, you have to do something, or, sometimes, commission work can be a little bit, oh dear, but it beats every other activity that I can think of.
Yes.
But yeah, don't procrastinate. That's
That's another thing too. And do you think social media is, I follow many artists who do these really lovely videos of like it's speed videos of them working on a painting.
Mhm.
So you can see it all in 3 minutes, but it's been days or sometimes weeks of work. Is it social media a distraction or can it be help?
It's entertainment.
Entertainment.
Yeah, it's not an instruction. In
In
fact,
any case.
that's the huge difference. That's why during COVID, we didn't go online, because what we do, what we teach, I don't think you can teach online. I'm sure 100 people would disagree with me, or thousands. I truly believe that at the level that I want to teach these skills at, that it doesn't translate. I mean, you have to feel the paper, you have to smell the oil, you have to, get your hands dirty, you have to be in the same space, you have to look at the same thing. And when there are filters through all of that, it doesn't happen.
Yes.
You just couldn't do it.
Someone is agreeing with you on the white lead paint. And then what is your opinion on cadmiums and cobalt paints? I'm probably mispronouncing this, but
No, you got it perfect.
oh my goodness. Okay.
I don't use cadmiums, not because they're poisonous or anything, but I don't like cadmiums. I use vermilion as my strongest red, and the yellows that I use are, I just don't use cadmium yellow. I have it, I don't really use it that much.
Okay.
What was the other part of the question?
Yes, the cobalt.
Oh, cobalt blue I use for sure. That is the only blue I use, really. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fast dryer, beautiful color. I have a very limited color palette, because my job is not to reproduce everything I see exactly as I see it. My job as an artist is to make a painting. And so if I can't get exactly the hue, temperature, chroma of something, for me, it doesn't matter. If the value is there, and I look at, most of the paintings that I really admire, they look just as good in black and white as they do in color. And they're very, obviously, color
Yes.
is
Odds and
as
layers.
Sargent said, it's an adornment form. And I agree with that. The form works, then the color just an extra plus.
Yes, yes. I think that is so true. Let's see. The question is, question on the 4 and 6 week workshops. Do they cover the more technical aspects, such as pigments?
Some do. In the summers, we have the technical lecture that's given. It covers a lot of that. How to prepare canvas, how to grind paints, and so forth. Toby Neve, who was kind of my understudy for the pigments and technical stuff, is doing an amazing job. He's taken over I used to do that, and now he does it. So it's offered in summer, and not all the workshops. So if that's what you're interested in, you should definitely check to make sure it's included.
Okay. Wow, very lovely. This is one of my questions. I have to pull it up on my phone because I was actually in Venice, and say Venice just restored several paintings painted by Julia Lama, one of the rare, kind of unknown female artists. And it seemed that the restorers, I talked to a restorer, and she found these beautiful wings of the angel. It was painted with a color, a rare pigment called Vivianite. Have you ever heard of it? It's actually this beautiful purplish hue. And she said they have never seen, they read about this beautiful purple, but they never saw it. And when they cleaned the dust and grime, the 17th century fresco, they found Vivianite.
It sounds familiar. I'm not going to say I know what it is.
So one more example of things disappearing, right?
My knowledge of materials is very specific in what I use. And it's really profound and deep when in those areas. Generic, like, do I know about tube paints or do I know about this? No, I don't. I just delved really deeply into what I use.
Yes, so, but it's useful for your interesting. But I think this also brings me completely not related to what you would use oil paints. But when I went to Paris and actually visited one of the workshops of the pastel making factory,
Yeah,
and the big problem was there was no more pigments that were part of these recipes. They're no longer to be found. So
yeah, the pigments are out there. They've become so expensive, and there's no earthly reason why they should be, because
yes,
it's just
there's just a lot of questions. One person said, "Just do it," right?
just do it. Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. When you go to the Uffizi gallery, do you have particular paintings that speak to you, or that others that all of a sudden start speaking to you?
Oh, good question. I have my favorites for sure, but I always am on the lookout for things that I might have missed. The way I normally go to a museum, especially ones I haven't been to before, sometimes I'll go through the catalog on the desk before I even go into the museum and see if there's something I specifically want to look at. Because I only have that kind of intense energy for a handful of paintings, and then whatever's left over, then I go see the rest of the museum. But for the Uffizi, I think the Rembrandt room for me is absolutely a must. The old man, the old bearded man, is one of the greatest paintings I think ever painted.
And do you think so? This is the rabbi, right?
Yeah,
Nicola
rabbi.
Roy.
Yeah.
And how about the young man with the hat? Do you think it's Rembrandt's self-portrait?
Sure. Yeah.
They took the label off, saying it's just part of the young man.
They come and
go,
yeah.
but
there's, I don't know, 5 paintings in the Metropolitan years ago that said, Rembrandt on another school of Rembrandt.
Yeah.
But
Daniel, thank you very much for your time.
It
was truly an honor to talk to you. The daughter of a painter, it was really special to be in your company, to be in a company of works of art. Some of them are still in process of being finished. And just to be in this beautiful creative space has really meant a lot. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. It was really a pleasure to have you with us. And I wanted to say the next Studiolo appointment will be March 30th. We will have Laura Morelli, who will come to talk to us about the art of building a gondola. Another really interesting craft that is now getting lost.
Yeah.
There are probably thousands of gondolas in Venice during the height of the Venetian Republic in 15th and 16th centuries. And today, only about 400 and only 2 workshops left in the city.
Some corresponding things that lap over
Yeah.
between gondola making, instrument making, are the varnishes that are used. And so I would imagine the paint that goes on a gondola, the quality and how it's made, was probably disappearing. All
Right,
this money up
where's your stuff?
handcrafted.
Yes. And I was actually just in a gondola workshop or a gondola paint, the paint place where they make them, but also repair them, because you have to repair them every about 2 or 3 years. And I was really impressed by the vibrant black and red they were using. I mean, because they really have to stand the test of time, the water, the
Elements,
humidity.
yeah.
I mean, elements are just brutal. So thank you, Daniel.
You're very
Thanks
welcome.
everyone for tuning in, and we will see you on the 30th of March for our gondola inspiration, I guess. See you all again. Ciao.